The sun beat down on Ouagadougou, casting long shadows across the rubble-strewn courtyard of the old French embassy. A jackhammer roared, echoing off colonial walls. Mamadou, a seasoned construction worker with calloused hands and a quiet pride, paused mid-swing. His drill had struck something, metallic, unyielding, buried deep beneath the foundation. He knelt, brushing away layers of dust and clay. A glint, then more. A strange emblem etched into the surface. Not French, not modern, ancient, African. The foreman shouted, but Mamadou didn't move. His breath caught. The ground beneath the embassy was hiding something, something it was never meant to reveal. Thousands of miles away, in a modest presidential office in Ouagadougou 2000, Ibrahim Traoré stood alone, staring out the window. His phone buzzed. A secure line. He answered. "Mr. President," the voice said, urgent, trembling. "We found it." Traoré turned slowly. "Found what?" A pause. Then, the vault. Beneath the embassy. "It's real." Silence. Traoré's eyes narrowed. He had heard whispers, rumors of stolen artifacts, gold, manuscripts, relics spirited away during the colonial era. But this was confirmation. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a faded map marked with red ink. The embassy sat atop a shaded circle. His grandfather had drawn it decades ago, swearing the land held secrets France would never admit to. Traoré clenched his fist. "Seal the site. No press. No diplomats. No one moves until I arrive." The aide hesitated. "Sir, it's not just treasure. There are documents. Names. Dates. Operations." Traoré's voice dropped. "Then history is about to change." He hung up. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware that beneath its soil, a reckoning had begun. But what lay beneath the embassy walls would ignite a firestorm across continents. Long before the jackhammer struck metal, Africa had already been carved open. Not by tools, but by treaties. Not by builders, but by colonizers. Beneath the embassies, the railways, the cathedrals, beneath the very soil, lay the scars of a continent plundered for its soul. Gold, ivory, manuscripts, sacred relics, all spirited away under the guise of civilization. But not all of it left. Some was buried, hidden, forgotten by time, remembered only by those who whispered of a shadow operation, Operation Trésor. It was never written in textbooks. No official record. Just fragments, intercepted cables, declassified memos, testimonies from dying agents. A covert French program, launched in the waning days of empire, designed to bury wealth across Africa. Vaults beneath embassies. Caches beneath consulates. A final insurance policy for a colonial power unwilling to let go. In Dakar, a retired archivist recalled crates marked with symbols he'd never seen again. In Bamako, a former intelligence officer spoke of maps burned before independence. And in Ouagadougou, beneath the embassy's crumbling facade, the vault had finally spoken. The discovery wasn't just metal and paper. It was memory. It was proof. Proof that the theft hadn't ended with flags being lowered. It had simply gone underground. News of the vault spread in hushed tones. Elders wept. Youths raged. Historians scrambled to cross-reference the symbols. Economists speculated on the value. But for the people of Burkina Faso, it wasn't about gold. It was about dignity, about truth, about reclaiming a story that had always been told by someone else. And in the heart of this reckoning stood a man who had once worn fatigues, now draped in the weight of a nation's hope. He wasn't born into power. He had fought for it, not with bullets alone, but with belief. Belief that Africa's future could be written by African hands. Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier, a revolutionary, a son of the soil. He had seen the vault, touched its walls, read the names etched into its ledgers, names of operatives, of ministers, of corporations that had fed off the continent like parasites. And now, he stood at a crossroads. Reveal the truth and risk international fury, or stay silent and let history rot beneath concrete. He chose fire. He summoned his cabinet, called in historians, economists, spiritual leaders. He ordered the vault's contents to be cataloged, digitized, preserved. Not for sale, not for ransom, for justice. And as the world began to stir, as diplomats whispered and journalists circled, one truth became undeniable. Africa was waking up. And the man chosen to confront this legacy? A soldier turned revolutionary, Ibrahim Traoré. Laurent Beaumont had mastered the art of smiling without sincerity. His charm was lacquered over decades of diplomatic maneuvering, polished in the marble corridors of the Quai d'Orsay, and hardened by a lifetime of defending France's civilizing mission. To the world, he was a statesman. To Africa, he was a gatekeeper of silence, of secrets, of stolen legacy. He arrived in Burkina Faso with a mandate: maintain influence, preserve relationships, and above all, protect the vault. It wasn't written in his official briefing, but he knew. Every ambassador assigned to a former colony knew. The vaults were real. They were the final chess pieces of empire, buried beneath embassies like relics of a game that was never meant to end. Beaumont had seen the blueprints. A midnight meeting in 1997, deep inside a secure archive in Lyon. A manila folder marked Trésor Operational. Inside, diagrams of subterranean chambers, coded ledgers, and a list of locations. Ouagadougou circled in red. He hadn't asked questions. He'd simply nodded, signed, and understood his role. Over the years, he'd hosted receptions above the vault, toasted to Franco-African unity while standing on top of crates filled with looted manuscripts and bullion. He'd dismissed activists as naive, historians as revisionists, and presidents like Traoré as temporary irritants. The vault was untouchable. It was protected by treaties, by diplomacy, by denial. Until it wasn't. The call came at 6:14 a.m. His aide's voice cracked. "Sir, the vault. It's been breached." Beaumont's blood ran cold. By whom? Construction crew. They were expanding the courtyard. They hit the chamber. He didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He simply hung up and stared at the wall, where a framed photo of Charles de Gaulle seemed to mock him. By the time he arrived at the embassy, the damage was done. Soldiers had cordoned off the site. Archaeologists were cataloging artifacts. And standing at the center, calm and unshaken, was Ibrahim Traoré. Beaumont approached, his tone clipped. "This is a violation of diplomatic territory." Traoré didn't blink. "This is a violation of history." Beaumont's eyes darted to the vault entrance. He saw the crates, the ledgers, the emblems of old ministries. He saw the truth, raw, undeniable, shimmering in the morning sun. He retreated to his office, poured a drink, and opened the drawer he'd sworn never to touch. Inside, the original blueprint. He traced the lines with trembling fingers. He remembered the meeting in Brussels, the coded language in Geneva, the quiet transfer of funds to ensure silence. It had all been so carefully orchestrated. And now, undone by a jackhammer. He called Paris. The line was tense. "We need a statement," he said. "We need to control the narrative." But the voice on the other end was cold. "Containment is no longer possible. Prepare for fallout." Beaumont hung up, his hands shaking. He had spent his career defending the illusion that France's presence in Africa was benevolent, cultural, mutual. But the vault was a tombstone to that lie. He watched Traoré from the window. The young president moved with purpose, surrounded by scholars and elders. He wasn't just excavating metal. He was excavating memory. Beaumont knew what came next. The documents would be scanned, the names released, the operations exposed, and among them, his own signature, approving transfers, authorizing silence, protecting the vault. He had always believed history could be managed. But now it was erupting. And Traoré wasn't just exposing gold. He was about to expose something far darker. Ibrahim Traoré was born beneath the Sahel sun, in a modest village where the dust clung to skin and dreams alike. His childhood was shaped by scarcity, of water, of opportunity, of justice, but also by the quiet strength of his mother, who taught him that dignity was not a luxury, but a birthright. He grew up listening to stories of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary who had once dared to imagine a Burkina Faso free from foreign chains. Sankara's words were more than history to Traoré, they were prophecy. As a boy, he would sit under the neem tree, sketching maps of Africa not divided by colonial borders, but united by shared struggle. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried weight. Teachers noticed his discipline. Elders saw his integrity. And when he joined the military academy, it wasn't ambition that drove him, it was duty. Traoré rose through the ranks not by force, but by principle. He refused bribes. He questioned orders. He studied geopolitics late into the night, tracing the patterns of exploitation that kept his continent in the shadows. His comrades called him Le Capitaine Silencieux, the quiet captain. But beneath that silence was a fire. He never forgot the village where he was born. On leave, he would return with books, medicine, and solar panels. He believed sovereignty began with self-reliance. While others chased promotions, he built trust. And when the people began to whisper his name, it wasn't out of fear, it was out of hope. The turning point came during a diplomatic summit in Ouagadougou. Traoré, then a senior officer, watched foreign dignitaries toast to partnership, while local farmers protested outside, their voices drowned by protocol. He saw the disconnect, the theater of diplomacy masking the theft of resources, the erasure of truth. That night, he walked alone through the capital, past monuments and ministries, and made a vow. Burkina Faso would no longer be a pawn. His rise to leadership was swift, but not without resistance. He faced smear campaigns, threats, and isolation. Yet he remained unshaken. In his first address as president, he quoted Sankara, "You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness." The crowd erupted. It wasn't madness they saw in him, it was clarity. Traoré governed with humility. He wore simple uniforms, refused luxury convoys, and met with citizens face to face. He launched literacy programs, reclaimed land from foreign corporations, and demanded transparency from international partners. But more than policies, it was his presence that stirred something deep. He was not just a leader, he was a symbol of resistance, of reclamation, of rebirth. And then came the vault. It was supposed to be a routine construction project, a courtyard expansion. But when the ground gave way and the chamber was revealed, Traoré stood at the edge, staring into the abyss of history. Gold glinted in the rubble. Documents lay scattered. Emblems of empire, buried but not forgotten. He didn't flinch. He didn't call for silence. He called for truth. As the world watched, Traoré prepared to unveil what had been hidden for generations. Not just treasure, but testimony. Of exploitation, of complicity, of colonial ghosts still haunting the present. And now, destiny had placed him at the center of Africa's greatest secret. The summit was meant to be symbolic, a gesture of diplomacy in the wake of the vault's discovery. But as the cameras rolled and the world tuned in, it became something else entirely, a reckoning. Seated beneath the gilded chandeliers of Ouagadougou's Grand Hall, President Ibrahim Traoré and Ambassador Laurent Beaumont faced each other across a long mahogany table. Between them lay a stack of documents, a tablet flickering with scanned archives, and the weight of centuries. Beaumont opened with practiced poise. France has always acted in good faith. These allegations are not only unfounded, they are inflammatory. Traoré didn't interrupt. He simply tapped the tablet. On the screen, a blueprint of the vault, then a ledger, then a diplomatic memo signed by Beaumont himself. The crowd murmured. Journalists leaned forward. The moderator cleared his throat, sensing the shift. "I believe the evidence speaks for itself," Traoré said, voice calm, deliberate. "These are not allegations. They are records. Your signature. Your authorization." Beaumont's jaw tightened. "Those documents are taken out of context. They were part of a classified operation, one that had nothing to do with exploitation." Traoré raised an eyebrow. Then why were they buried beneath an embassy? The tension crackled. Social media feeds exploded. #VaultTruth trended across continents. In Paris, news anchors scrambled to reframe the narrative. In Ouagadougou, the crowd outside the summit grew louder, chanting Sankara's name. Beaumont leaned forward, his tone sharpening. "You're politicizing history, stirring resentment, undermining decades of partnership." Traoré didn't flinch. Partnership built on silence is not partnership. It's complicity. The moderator tried to pivot, but the room was locked in. Every eye was on Traoré. Every camera captured Beaumont's unraveling composure. Then Traoré stood. He walked to the podium, holding a thin folder. "This," he said, "is a transcript of a.m. meeting held in Brussels. It details the transfer of cultural artifacts from Burkina Faso to private collectors in Europe. It names officials. It includes dates. And it confirms that the vault was not an accident. It was a strategy." Gasps rippled through the hall. Beaumont's face drained of color. "Ibrahim," he said, voice low, almost pleading, "you don't understand the consequences. Traoré turned to him, eyes steady. I understand them better than you think. The moderator tried to regain control. Mr. President, are you suggesting that? But Traoré raised a hand. I'm not suggesting. I'm revealing. The room fell silent. And then, with a final tap on the tablet, Traoré projected an image onto the screen behind him. A photograph of a sealed chamber, deeper than the vault, marked with the insignia of a long-defunct intelligence bureau. But Traoré wasn't done. What he revealed next silenced the room. The summit hall had never been so quiet. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm. Ibrahim Traoré stood at the podium, his posture composed, his eyes scanning the crowd, diplomats, journalists, generals, and citizens alike. Behind him, the screen flickered with the image of the sealed chamber, deeper than the vault, marked with the insignia of a long-defunct intelligence bureau. Laurent Beaumont sat frozen, his fingers clenched around a glass of water he hadn't touched. The ambassador's once polished demeanor had begun to crack. His tie was slightly askew. His brow glistened, and his silence was deafening. Traoré leaned into the microphone. What we uncovered, he began, was not just a vault. It was a system. He tapped the tablet. A new image appeared. A classified memo dated 1987, stamped with the seal of the French Ministry of Defense. The subject line read, Operation Eclipse Strategic Containment of Revolutionary Threats in West Africa. Gasps rippled through the hall. This document, Traoré continued, details covert. Operations designed to destabilize governments that resisted foreign control. It names targets. It outlines funding channels. And it confirms what many have long suspected, that Thomas Sankara's assassination was not merely a coup. It was a coordinated act of imperial sabotage. The screen shifted again. A grainy photograph appeared. Sankara's final cabinet meeting. Traoré zoomed in on a man seated near the back, a French intelligence liaison, later reassigned to Burkina Faso's embassy. Beaumont's face paled. This man, Traoré said, was present during the planning stages of the coup. His name appears in multiple communications. And his final report, filed days before Sankara's death, recommended removal of destabilizing elements. The crowd erupted. Shouts of justice and Sankara lives echoed through the hall. Journalists scrambled to capture every frame. Social media feeds exploded. In Paris, emergency meetings were called. In Dakar, protests ignited. And in Ouagadougou, the people stood electrified. Beaumont rose, his voice trembling. This is outrageous. These are unverified claims. You're weaponizing history to serve your own agenda. Traoré didn't respond. He simply turned the page. Next came the ledgers, records of gold transfers from Burkina Faso to offshore accounts in Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands. Each entry bore the initials of embassy officials. Each transaction was masked as cultural preservation or security cooperation. These, Traoré said, are the receipts of theft, not just of wealth, but of identity. Beaumont staggered back into his seat. Traoré paused. He let the silence stretch. Let the weight of truth settle. Then he spoke again. For decades, Africa has been treated as a resource, not a partner. Our leaders have been silenced. Our revolutions buried. Our gold hidden beneath embassies. But today, we reclaim our narrative. He turned to the crowd. I am calling for formal reparations. Not symbolic gestures. Not apologies. But tangible restitution for the stolen gold, the stolen lives, and the stolen futures. The hall erupted. Applause thundered. Some wept. Others chanted. The moment was no longer political. It was spiritual. And more than that, Traoré continued. I am announcing the formation of a new economic alliance. One that rejects dependency. One that embraces sovereignty. He tapped the screen again. A logo appeared, the Pan-African Sovereignty Pact. Beneath it, the names of 10 nations, Mali, Niger, Guinea, Chad, the Central African Republic, and others, all committed to a shared currency backed by African resources, not foreign reserves. This alliance, Traoré said, will trade in gold, lithium, and agricultural surplus. It will invest in African infrastructure, education, and innovation. And it will be governed by Africans, for Africans. Beaumont tried to speak, but no one was listening. Traoré stepped down from the podium. The crowd surged forward. Cameras flashed. Flags waved. And somewhere in the back, A young girl held up a sign that read, "Sankara smiles today." But Traoré wasn't done. He turned once more to the microphone. "There is one final document," he said, voice low, deliberate. It was buried beneath the vault. It was encrypted, and it was never meant to be found. He held up a sealed envelope. It contains the names of every official, African and European, who profited from the vault system. Some are still in power. Some are in this room. The silence was absolute. And the world? It wasn't ready for what came next. The summit's final moments detonated across the globe like a seismic blast. Within minutes of Traoré's revelations, the hashtag #AfricaRises surged to the top of trending lists on every major platform. TikTok flooded with clips of his speech, remixed with Afrobeat anthems and Sankara quotes. Instagram lit up with artwork depicting Traoré as a modern-day Lion of Africa, his silhouette framed by vault doors and golden maps. Twitter became a battlefield of truth and reckoning. In Nairobi, youth gathered in Uhuru Park waving Pan-African flags. In Accra, murals of Sankara and Traoré appeared overnight on city walls. In Johannesburg, students marched to the French consulate demanding reparations. The continent was awake, not just stirred, but roaring. African leaders responded swiftly. Mali's interim president declared full support for the Pan-African Sovereignty Pact. Guinea's finance minister announced the withdrawal of reserves from European banks. Chad, Niger, and the Central African Republic issued a joint statement. Africa will no longer be managed. We will lead. France, meanwhile, reeled. The Élysée Palace scrambled to contain the fallout. Diplomatic channels buzzed with urgency. Embassies across West Africa faced protests. Trade negotiations stalled. Cultural exchange programs were suspended. For the first time in decades, France found itself diplomatically isolated, not by decree, but by moral gravity. And then came the ripple. Celebrities across the diaspora voiced support. Lupita Nyong'o posted a photo of Traoré with the caption, "History bends toward justice." Burna Boy released a freestyle titled Vaults and Visions, calling out colonial theft and praising African unity. Trevor Noah devoted an entire segment to the summit, ending with, "This isn't just politics, it's poetic justice." Commentators on CNN, Al Jazeera, and BBC debated the implications. Was this the beginning of a new global order? Could Africa finally rewrite its economic destiny? Youth movements from Brazil to Bangladesh echoed the call for sovereignty and transparency. Even in Europe, students protested outside ministries, demanding their governments confront the legacy of empire. But amid the celebration, Traoré remained grounded. He returned to his village for a brief visit, walking the same dusty paths he had once traced as a boy. He met with elders, listened to farmers, and reminded his people that the vault was only the beginning. The real treasure, he said, was not buried beneath embassies. It was in the minds and hearts of Africans ready to reclaim their future. Then, in a surprise broadcast aired across the continent, Traoré delivered his final message from the summit stage. No fanfare, no theatrics, just a single spotlight and his voice. "We have exposed gold," he said. "We have exposed lies. But what we must now expose and protect is our unity." He paused. Because gold can be stolen, but dignity? That must be earned, lived, and defended. The screen faded to black. And the world? It wasn't ready for what came next. The vault was no longer just a chamber of gold and secrets. It had become a mirror, reflecting not only the scars of colonial greed but the resilience of a continent long underestimated. As the dust settled and the world reeled from the revelations, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a crowd of thousands in Ouagadougou's Independence Square, not to celebrate wealth, but to redefine it. He held no gold in his hands, no ledgers, no artifacts, only a microphone and a message. "We are not poor," he said, his voice echoing across the plaza. "We are robbed." The crowd erupted, not in anger, but in affirmation. It was a truth they had always known but had rarely heard spoken aloud by a head of state. Traoré's words cut through decades of denial, reframing the narrative not as one of victimhood, but of stolen dignity. He continued, "The treasure beneath our soil is not just mineral. It is memory. It is culture. It is the labor of our ancestors and the dreams of our children. And today, we reclaim it, not to hoard, but to heal." Across Africa, screens flickered with his speech. In Lagos, youth gathered in cafes to watch. In Kigali, students projected it onto university walls. In Bamako, elders nodded solemnly, remembering Sankara's voice. In Traoré's cadence, he spoke not just to leaders, but to the youth, the generation born into debt, disillusionment, and diaspora. You are not inheriting ruins, he said. You are inheriting truth. And truth is the foundation of justice. The speech crescendoed into a call for unity. Not the fragile unity of treaties and trade deals, but the fierce, unbreakable bond of shared purpose. Traoré invoked the names of African visionaries, Nkrumah, Lumumba, Biko, not as martyrs, but as architects of a future still under construction. Our dignity, he said, is not negotiable. It is not granted by foreign powers. It is ours. And it begins with how we see ourselves, not as pawns, but as protagonists. He paused, letting the silence speak. Then, with a quiet intensity, he declared, justice is greater than exploitation. Dignity is greater than denial. And pride, African pride, is not arrogance. It is survival. The crowd stood in thunderous applause. Flags waved, drums beat, and for a moment, the square felt less like a political space and more like a sacred one, where history was not just remembered, but rewritten. Traoré didn't promise miracles. He didn't offer easy answers. What he offered was something rarer, a moral compass. A reminder that sovereignty begins not with borders, but with belief. And as the sun rose over Ouagadougou, a new chapter had begun. The story began with a vault, hidden beneath the soil of Ouagadougou, sealed by silence, guarded by legacy. But what Ibrahim Traoré unearthed was far greater than treasure. He uncovered a truth long buried, a reckoning long delayed, and a spirit that refused to be colonized. This wasn't just about gold. It was about memory, about justice, about reclaiming the narrative that had been written without African voices. Traoré didn't just confront the past, he rewrote the future. As the world watched, stunned and divided, one thing became clear. The age of quiet compliance was over. Africa was no longer asking for permission. It was declaring its power. And now, the revolution is yours to carry forward. Subscribe to Witness History. Share this story. Be part of the revolution. Because this isn't just a moment, it's a movement. One built on truth, dignity, and the unshakable belief that no empire, no vault, no ambassador can silence a people rising. Let this be your call to action. Let this be your reminder that history bends toward those who dare to speak. As Traoré said, standing before the world, they buried our gold, but they couldn't bury our truth.